Good afternoon, everyone. This is Chuck Starnagel with TribalWise. I want to welcome you to today's webinar, Business Continuity for Tribal Enterprises, brought to you in partnership with our good friends at Arctic IT. Just a few reminders for everybody that while the presentation is going on today, everything will be recorded for unlimited future viewing. You can find it on TribalWise.com. Everyone that is listening today will be muted, but we ask you, if you have any questions, please send them our way. As you can see, Dave Bailey is sitting there ready to answer any and everything that you can come up with. Just a little bit about our webinar today. Again, it's on business continuity for tribal entities. Our presenters today are Arctic IT's president, Dave Bailey, and CIO, Phillip Jackson. Also joining us on the call today is special guest McElrath, Strategic Project Manager for Mille Corporate Ventures, a management company for the Mille Band of Ojibwe, located in East Central Minnesota. The purpose of this presentation is to give leaders in both tribal government and tribal enterprise the tools to achieve better business continuity with cloud technology. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave. Dave, it's all yours.
All right, very good. So we'll go ahead and get started. So thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for joining us today. As we're all aware, business continuity and the world as we know it has somewhat taken a little bit of a change. When we think about the term continuity, some of you may be familiar with a government term that we hear once in a while called a COOP, Continuity of Operation Plan. And usually the circumstances that require you to go to your business continuity plan is whether some act of God like an earthquake or a hurricane, a flood, some local constraint that's been put upon your business location, pandemic, and a financial shutdown are typically not in that list as we've known it in modern times. Usually when we refer to the term continuity, we're going to talk about fault tolerance, backups, co-location of operations of our assets. But the cloud has presented a different opportunity for us, not just for business continuity, but also collaboration and developing a modern workplace that allows us to stay reactive regardless of the situation we face as a workforce. So in that, we're going to take you through a little bit of what cloud strategy looks like. We've been doing this both inside the TribalWise and into our internal client community in the tribal market for the past few years. And of course, circumstances have had that take on a little bit different of context. We've had an amazing amount of attendance over the past few weeks. We have a good crew here as well for today's session. We're going to talk about some of the benefits of the cloud, maybe answer some questions on how you can move different workloads to the cloud and how business continuity is shaped up by what eventually becomes that modern workplace. And then we'll open it up for some questions and answers and see if there's any posing things that we can get answered for you. So first and foremost, we want to talk about what legacy technology actually means to a lot of folks. Regardless of situation we're in today, siloed groups of people that work in different office locations, maybe in different departments, places where we have duplicate data, manual processes, insufficient tracking, and then, of course, an overarching concern about the security of the information we work with. Well, now more than ever, as we move to a remote workforce and we come back to the workplace, everybody in the organization has a really acute knowledge of what worked and what didn't. What did we have access to? What did we have challenges with? And what do we need to replace or repair or maybe update so that we don't face this again, right? How can we remain agile and protected and secure as we look to business continuity? So we have a great opportunity today to speak with one of our clients, McElrath from Mille, and we were working with them a number of years ago on some of their business applications. And as they as they looked to create what's considered basically a holding company or a management services company, if you will, across their enterprises, being part of that casino environment, that hospitality environment, the network, the compliance, lots of different issues, they started to look at themselves as a modern enterprise and figure out, okay, how can we be across all the different geographic locations we have, non-gaming organizations, gaming organizations, real estate investments, many different components of their business. And how do we do that from a top-down perspective so that we're maintaining security, access, confidentiality, and integrity to that information and data that we're responsible to help work with. So you'll see here, this is a quote from Drew as we started working a while back to allow our team to work remotely. We work with them very closely to get them into the Microsoft cloud. There are multiple clouds, we'll talk about that today, but we brought Drew on to have him give us a little bit of dialogue as to the decision tree that they went through. So with that, Drew, can you hear me?
Yep, how's it going, Dave?
All right, so here we have just some of the main bullet points that came up during your process, a year and a half, almost 2 years ago now, as you looked at going into the cloud and some of the things you had to consider. So let's start with needing to be anywhere, any device, anytime. Why was that a big deal for your organization?
Well, Dave, when we started to take a look at, really setting up ourselves in the best position as our corporate management entity, and how we could, work collaboratively in the different places we go, especially as executives, fully, right? You're all over the place all the time in a normal environment. And so we really wanted people to be able to work how you want, where you want. And in order to do that, we needed to really get more cutting edge. And so as we started to look at Microsoft, because we had a lot of depth of knowledge in that area and what they were really doing out on the cutting edge in the cloud, we just thought a full-scale adoption of that and going with kind of a teams first strategy for how we collaborated and connected was the way to go.
Very good. And then I remember one of the things that was a challenge, and I'm sure many of the audience will have to address this at some point as well. The gaming industry, not only from a state perspective, but also from a local tribal gaming commission point of view, had to make sure that the casino networks, the business networks, there's a lot of compliance that's involved in making sure that that information is protected and secured. Tell me a little bit about navigating that and why the cloud provided a new opportunity for you.
Sure. So by moving our corporate operations out to the cloud, we were able to more closely define what we were doing in the gaming information space, which is what the regulatory body has charge of protecting, and that helped us understand, kind of culturally, what were we doing where we were supporting our casino operations at the corporate level, and where were we actually operating as that corporate body that was providing guidance and services to all of our businesses, not just performing organizational tasks for the casino.
And I remember you sharing with us as well, and one of the parts of dialogue that I think is really, really important for the audience to hear is that many of the tribal entities that we work with, specifically at the enterprise space, their biggest investments throughout time have always been in that casino infrastructure, that hotel casino infrastructure, whatever that hospitality business is or how diverse it is, because that was a revenue generating part of the business, of course, and that's where the best infrastructure sat. So because the Gaming Commission and compliance oversaw that, as you started to diversify operations into non-gaming organizations, whether it was C-stores or commercial real estate or something to that effect, the same type of compliance and infrastructure didn't fit. So one of the key decision points was, well, instead of investing in our own separate on-premise infrastructure or carving out additional space inside that compliance infrastructure where it doesn't necessarily apply, we wanted to look to a more cost-effective way to move to the cloud. So we had no physical assets that we depended on, we had subscription-based assets. And from a for-profit perspective, immediately diminishing the need for capital investment versus operating expense. And that was a big part of your decision criteria.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, and I think maybe other organizations are in this position as well. Our casinos fund their capital investments through the revenue that they make, right? As the management organization, we don't, our capital projects aren't funded that way. The band actually has to, pony up the money for anything that we want to spend big dollars on. And so it's very important to us, especially at the corporate level, to try and minimize our capital expense.
Yep, and that's a good point too. How it's funded and the different decision criteria that are involved. I remember one other thing too, and that was, well, we have to start out at this size, and we know that as we expand our operations, we're going to grow. But when we're buying capital assets, it seems unrealistic to buy a server that's this big to allow for growth when we're going to start out and we need this much of it, right? When we're talking about storage, utilization, processing capability, it's one of the cool things you're able to leverage is to say, okay, we're going to start out in the cloud with this number of users and this amount of space and horsepower to run our corporate ventures business. And then as that grows, we can scale that up and only add it as it's needed, almost pay by the sip, if you will, pay by the drink for what you use. And I know that was real valuable from a startup cost perspective as you got that running.
Yeah, absolutely. And in this instance of what we're going through today, by using a mixed combination of licensing, we can surge our licensing to be able to accommodate. We did a summer intern program with 20 young band members, and we don't have to keep that capacity. We can let that go. And then we're not using some of our Azure solutions in production at the moment with our casinos closed. We're able to actually just turn those off and save that cost. We still pay a little bit for storage within Azure, but we're not paying compute, we're not paying data transfer, and we're actually able to cut our costs by about 70% or so for one of our more expensive cutting edge solutions we're using at the casino, just by housing it in Azure and using those Azure resources in that way.
Yeah, that's a huge point. Thank you for bringing that up. So translation, scalability, to be able to scale up and scale down based upon demand and look at growth and retraction, depending on what's going on in the market. The cloud gives you that ability from a subscription perspective. So thank you, Drew. We're going to move on here, and then Drew will be available for the audience for questions as we get to the end of the session. All right, thanks. All right, so let's talk about cloud strategy. For those of us that have heard the term cloud now for a number of years, I assume that it makes sense to most people, but every once in a while, people have an idea of what it is, but they don't quite understand that there's different types of flavor of the cloud, if you will. I tell everybody that, a year or so ago, I had to explain to my father that the cloud is on the ground. And he's in his mid-70s, and he's like, well, then why do they call it the cloud, right? So the cloud is really just infrastructure that's not currently located at your place anymore. It's somewhere else geographically. And because they're able to leverage the economies of scale, as you can see, multiple servers, big spaces, right? You're going to pay less for it because of the economies of scale. So public cloud is a term that's used where multiple people are using it. The compute, storage, and resources are all in this huge, large environment. And that computing cloud is divided up with security and firewall and different types of storage methodologies to keep your information safe and protected. Public cloud does not mean that it is all mixed up in a salad bowl and anybody can get in any piece in the bowl at any time. It's a complete misnomer. There is information in the public cloud, of course, that is specifically yours. You can protect it, you can encrypt it so that only you have the key. So public cloud does not necessarily mean like it's a big park and anybody can go anytime they want. It's just, it's a different architecture, right? And then when we talk about private cloud is what most tribes offer currently if they don't already have some investment in a public cloud infrastructure. Microsoft 365, for example, is considered a public cloud, okay? Private cloud would mean I have my own data center, right? or I've carved out a large piece of hardware infrastructure in someone else's cloud, and I've created my own cloud resources that only my network of folks has access to, right? And then we have hybrid, where I might have a combination of both private and public cloud, right? And then something that's quite common nowadays, something that we put out there as well for all of our clients, is multi-cloud, where I may have a little bit of everything. And that is what we would find a healthy mixture. An example of that might be, I have my software as a service functions and features in maybe the Microsoft cloud, and I might have some server or data assets in AWS because I'm backing up what I do in Microsoft's environment. Well, why wouldn't I do that, right? No, I don't want to have all my eggs in one basket. Maybe I want to move some stuff back and forth. So a multi-cloud, hybrid cloud strategy is important, okay? So cloud versus on-premise solutions. On-premise is what most of us have grown up with. Some of us that are younger in the IT space, you might be attending today and might be like, yeah, the cloud makes perfect sense because it's all you've ever known. And believe it or not, we have some of those that work at Arctic IT. They're like, yeah, the cloud, what's the big deal? Because they've never known a day without a mobile device or a computer in their hands. It's a really amazing time to watch someone like that evolve into technology while the rest of us are still weighing the pros and cons of some of these changes that have been pressed upon us. So easy and inexpensive to set up, right? I don't have to procure hardware. I don't have to plug it in. I don't have to do that. I spin it up as a service. And we'll talk about the different types of cloud services. Scales to your need. You heard Drew say, hey, right now, our casino's closed, our operations are deprecated, so we're able to take some of those resources, shrink down our utilization. Not only do we have continuity of operations, but we also have the ability to diminish the amount of cost required to stay in operating mode, right? So we can shrink down that investment because it's a service. In the winter time, I might use less electricity because I'm not running my air conditioning at my house. In the summertime, when it's hot, I'm going to use more air conditioning, so I use more electricity, right? Well, that's real easy to figure out, right? I'm going to use more juice because I got to run air conditioning. So this is a scalability issue. Continuity and scalability are actually need to be in the same component. It didn't used to look like that. When you had all your infrastructure inside your operations, scalability and continuity were not divided up as separate levers. You had to have as much bandwidth as you could buy at the time and allow expansion for yourself versus just turning it on when you need it. There's a big difference there in cost. Low maintenance. You still have to maintain assets in the cloud. I want to make sure I put that out there. However, you don't have the same type of maintenance, right? You don't have the same type of maintenance. The expense is very different. The amount of assets and capital you require to do maintenance is a lot less expensive. Fault tolerance and geo-redundancy. If I'm in the West region of the United States and I'm in the data center there, whether it's with Microsoft, AWS, anybody else, I'm out there, right? And say there's a big earthquake or something happens out there, a fire, so the data center gets shut down. Geo-redundancy means I can switch that workload in that cloud data center and I can move it over to the East region or somewhere in the Midwest, or vice versa. Hurricane coming into the Virginia market, I'm going to switch all my operations over to the West region. All it is a checkbox. So simplicity like that in continuing our operations. And then we have three types of cloud services: software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service. Software as a service is the one that most of us can relate to. Most of us have an understanding of software as a service. If you know an Arctic IT and you know our work in the tribal space, most of what we work with is in the Microsoft environment. An example of that would be Office 365. I don't want to keep paying for Microsoft Office to install it on my computer $400 to $500 every 3 to 4 years. I'm just going to pay for it as a service, either at a monthly or yearly cost, and I'm always going to have the latest and greatest version, patched and secure, of those Microsoft business applications or Office applications that I rely on, things like Microsoft Word, Excel, Outlook, PowerPoint, right? And then instead of having an Exchange server local on-premise that I'm going to have to babysit, back up, and take care of, I'm going to have my mail service put up in the cloud so that I don't have to pay for that infrastructure and additional costs anymore. That's a good example of software as a service, all right? Dynamics 365 is another application that we use. It has both ERP, for example, tribal enrollment, family wellness. Those are solutions that we build into that. I don't have to install anything on a computer. I go into a browser on any device, anywhere, anytime, and I use that business application when I need to. Platform as a service is a little bit more robust. That means that I'm going to take something like an Azure, Microsoft Azure, or Amazon Web Services, AWS, and I'm going to set up server infrastructure there and move my line of business applications or data, or both, into those cloud services. I might have a server operating system where I actually log in to that server console. I have a user interface there. I can spin up and stop and start services as I need to. And I might not even want to buy the software. I might just pay for that platform as a service. For example, a SQL service. SQL stands for Structured Query Language, SQL. I might have a database server that I run up there. I don't want to buy a server. I don't want to buy licensing for that server and then licensing for the database. I just want to pay for that data platform as a service. Then we have infrastructure as a service. IaaS, if you will. And of course, in the IT space, we're all really good at making up acronyms. These are three that you should know at this point. Infrastructure as a service means I actually need to compute power for a particular task, and I'm going to use that hardware and infrastructure, and I'm actually going to pay for the hardware that's in the rack. Okay, rack space is one of those common ones that we see quite a bit. AWS and Microsoft Azure allow you to do infrastructure as a service as well. But there you're not only paying for the compute power that you want to carve out of that person's data center, you want to actually add the licensing and all the other stuff to it and have more of a control. There is more cost with infrastructure as a service. There's less cost with platform as a service. And the most cost effective is software as a service. But there's not a software as a service for everything that we do, right? So you have to weigh the pros and cons of what's going to make the most sense for your business. Software as a service is something that we like to touch on here. You'll see the iceberg analogy, if you're familiar with that. 89% of an iceberg you see floating in seawater is actually below the surface. You only see 11% of the iceberg. And since you're working with here, Arctic IT, you can't get through a presentation without a little glacier talk or iceberg talk, right? So when you have on-premises investments, you're paying 9%, if you will, for your software licenses, and all the other costs is for those ongoing things you see down there. IT has a lot more difficulty in maintaining that and keeping it operational, protecting it, securing it, backing it up. There's power involved, there's space involved for storage, and all of a sudden you look at a pretty overwhelming expense. When you move into cloud computing, most of that cost is moved up into a subscription fee for less than you can actually do it for internally, and your ongoing costs really are just subscription costs. Now that doesn't mean your IT people don't have something to take care of. They just move from operationally tactical to more strategic because they're able to now focus on those cloud resources and the value that they're delivering to your organization versus the day-to-day nuts and bolts twisting it all up inside that infrastructure, okay? So you need to understand, doesn't mean that you don't need IT people, it just means that they're able to focus on better things, and maybe you don't need as many people in that organization going forward as your organization expands. Okay, so that's just a little bit of understanding. And the service level agreement for most cloud services today, from a software as a service perspective, is upwards of 99.9% uptime. If you told your IT department that that's what you expect, they would laugh at you because it's almost not possible. Even if they do their best job, it's almost not possible to have that kind of uptime. So let's talk about what cloud migration looks like. We've talked about the types of cloud, why it makes sense, where it's cost effective, what value it might have. We like to break this down into kind of a Rube Goldberg, if you're familiar with a little bit of an operating system. Most people ask us, how do I move something to the cloud? And it might be a level 101 type thing, but even as a business executive or an IT executive, figuring out how to evaluate what cloud solution is right for you could be a little daunting, especially if you have a lot of moving parts. So we like to go through what we call the 9 steps of moving something into the cloud, right? And as we flow through that, first we want to figure out what is the person's on-premise footprint. If you don't have a big footprint, maybe it makes sense to do a complete lift and shift. If you have a bunch of different stuff out there, you may have to evaluate what we call low-hanging fruit. In other words, this is a real simple thing to move. Why would you want to keep this on premise? There's no business reason to do that. Matter of fact, in many cases, less secure to have it on premise than it is to move it in the cloud. And for tribes, that conversation has evolved when we talk about sovereignty, security, and a lot of different provisions have been made in the cloud market to address what we call data privacy and data sovereignty, okay? So if you have questions about that, we're experts in addressing that and how it might relate to your concerns on sovereignty. Number 2, we're going to map the dependencies about storage and what that looks like. How much data do you need to move? How much data do you really need? You could have a terabyte of information over here, but you really only are required to keep, 300 gigs of it, which would still be a lot of data to move to the cloud. Why do we need that information? What's it doing for us? Right? So you have to evaluate why. Once we nail that stuff down, we make a map. Like I said, it could be multiple pieces, and then we have to prioritize what we're going to move first and why, or it could just be one thing. Are we going to go to IaaS, PaaS, or SaaS? What are we going to do? Once we figure that out, we come up with a cost model. We figure out how much that's going to be. What is our monthly investment? What are we saving? We have to know the economic benefit before we launch that rocket, right? Then we're going to move to production. And we're not going to just switch it over and come in on a Monday and hope for the best, right? We're going to take some aspects of that, get it set up, move it over there, test it, get some of the data migrated, make sure everything works well. And then once we have that confidence, we're going to make what we call a go live plan. We're going to get the environment stood up. We're going to get ready to move, and we're going to launch it, right? We're going to launch it up to the cloud, right? And then once it's up, we're going to keep that old on-premise environment in place for a little while everyone's using the cloud. That's called a regression path. God forbid something got missed. You don't want to shoot yourself in the foot, right? You want to make sure you have that. And once we have an all clear, we document everything. We deprecate that old on-premise environment. And then we move to maintenance and strategy and managing that cloud investment, right? So your IT person that's involved in that process, or your IT department, is going to go through that whole planning process. And at the end, they're going to switch their attention from managing all these on-premise components to make this one application work to managing this application in a service and how it's effectively changing the way you work at your desk. And that's very different because right now they're responsible for all of that, but the on-premise requirements take a lot of their time. So when we look at business continuity, specifically in the context of our time today, if I have to make a switch from one place to another, or some kind of impact on my business, whether it's tribal government or tribal enterprise, causes me to have to work differently, I don't want to have to worry about the moving parts. I want to worry about the impact on my end users and their ability to continue to function in their role and do their job with confidentiality, access to the information, and reliability on it, okay? So streamlining business continuity. Cloud technology we just went through gives us the ability and the agility and the flexibility to work when we need it. It accommodates remote work regardless of what you need to do, when it matters most, right? And I think one of the outcomes that we'll all agree is that many of us that used to sit at a desk in an office location, hopefully they've realized, and from an employee perspective, that you can be just as productive at home. Hopefully you can, versus being in the office. Maybe it staggers how you work going forward. Maybe it gives you an ability to be home and not commute an hour to an hour and a half all 5 days of the week. Maybe only be in the office a few days of the week because of some of the capability you've gained because of the situation we're in. So when we talk about security and governance, the information that we maintain, if we're in the tribal casino, it's going to be player information, it's going to be gaming information, it's going to be financial data. If we're in the tribal government, it's going to be community member data information, the different programs and services that we might be providing to them from the tribal government out to the community, different investments and things that we have from a financial perspective, grants that we're receiving, fund accounting, you name it. One of the key aspects is governing that data so that we make sure that we protect it, we have access to it, we can always trust the integrity of it no matter where it's located or how we're accessing it. The Azure Cloud Platform requires security to get into it. It is almost always more secure than the environment that you're currently operating in. And if you're an IT professional, you might want to challenge that statement, and that's okay. Matter of fact, if you're not being challenged on security as an IT professional, something's wrong, right? So anybody that wants to sell you something as a cloud migration, and that's our business, right? We meet up with IT professionals all the time that says, I need to manage the security down here on the ground versus something in the cloud. I can't secure it up there. We're happy to have that conversation with you on why your options would be more secure in the cloud than on-premise when it comes to risk mitigation and that threat surface that you're trying to shrink. So continuous operations, scale and elasticity, you've heard that about Azure. Latest and greatest technology. I don't have to worry about operating system upgrades and all these different versionings and things that have to go on with my server infrastructure. So that investment from a capital perspective starts to flatten out. You can have as much storage as you want. All you have to do is ask and pay for it. Unlimited storage, as much as you want, right? Integration platform, common data service, or the CDS. That's one of the biggest things that we find specifically in tribal government and tribal enterprise. For example, how many systems inside the tribal government do you have what you would call a tribal member master record that has their name, social security number, home address, contact information, all that stuff? Guarantee you inside your operations, you have anywhere from 5 to 12, that's the average we find, 5 to 12 different systems with that exact information in it. Although it's for the same person, it almost has different information in it all the time because they're not maintained in one place. So think about a common data service that feeds those systems, right? So that's really important. Integrating those things from a common data service as well. There's a tool out there called Power Automate. So maybe I don't want to replace those line of business applications, but I do want one place to be that system of record. I can use Power Automate to make sure that if I change it one place, it's updated everywhere, right? Collaboration. Office 365, sharing calendars, meeting up on tools like Teams or something to that effect. Collaboration platform's never been more important for chat, enterprise content management, and sharing the information at a business level so that we're reducing the number of silos we have in that space. So we look at the integrated cloud platform, Dynamics in and of itself, and for those of us that have been around the Microsoft space for a while, it's important to know that there are really 3 cloud services, or what we call 3 separate clouds inside Microsoft's world. We have Microsoft 365, which is Office 365. It's the Windows 10 updates. It's the Intune service that updates those workstations, and several other large security tools that are baked into that subscription model for everything you need to be or have a productive modern workplace. And then there's Azure, which is those infrastructure and platform as a service. And then there's the Dynamics 365 product line. Those are the business applications for Microsoft. Everything from accounting to supply chain management, or what we traditionally call as ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning. And then you have what's called the Power Apps platform, which allows you to develop unique business applications along all those different lines of business. And traditionally, something called CRM stands for Customer Relationship Management. We used to call it XRM. Now it's called Customer Engagement. So you think about it on the tribal enterprise side with player development. How many systems do I have where I have a player or a patron's master record in my casino system? Right, I have the casino management system, and then I have my restaurant system. I might have spa, I might have golf, I might have a loyalty program that's completely separate. And I have that patron or customer's information, name, address, phone number, email, maybe some statistics about where they play and how they play. I might have that in 5 or 6 different systems. And now I want to market to them about a concert we're having or something we're doing on property, right? Or a promotion that they might be eligible for. Having a centralized system and a business application that consolidates that, not only from a marketing perspective, but also eliminates the silo of information so that as a player, if I want to change my information, it feeds all of those things at the same time. That's the power of a modern workplace. Okay? All right, so one of the things that we used to talk about years ago was the return on investment. And when you were strictly not dealing with the cloud and you were talking about just purely looking at on-premise investment, return on investment was kind of hard to prove to somebody because it would take a really long period of time. And most of the time, they weren't taking into account things like energy consumption, air conditioning to cool off the server room, the fact that somebody takes an hour and 15-minute lunch when they're really only supposed to be gone an hour, and the labor that's factored into that cost is throwing off your total cost and return on investment. Little things like that you could argue at an acute scale about how you were getting a return on the investment. When we look at something like Dynamics 365 as a SaaS offering, a software as a service offering, to pull all that infrastructure out and just hit it through a browser or a mobile app on my phone, for every $1 that you spend, Microsoft Dynamics 365 on average today delivers about just shy of $17 for every $1 you spend in return on investment. And that's a pretty exact number to argue about. In other words, there's so much data out there to show how software as a service is now more cost effective. It's hard to argue with. Of course, there's some independent research out there to let you know where we got that information. And yeah, we've drank a lot of Microsoft Kool-Aid, that's our job. But this isn't just Microsoft Dynamics 365. This is switching to software as a service in general. You would see that kind of investment. We just happen to paint it with a Microsoft brush. Okay. So collaboration is intuitive. One of the things that we talk about quite a bit is Microsoft Teams. One of the largest growing business applications in Microsoft's history of all time prior to COVID-19. With the onset of the situation we all find ourselves in, by far the single biggest cloud technology adoption in the history of any business application out there. Teams went from several million active users at one time to well over 120 million active Teams users at any one time globally in a matter of 5 days. I had to read that a few times myself. Think about the scalability of someone's cloud infrastructure to adapt that kind of growth that quickly, right? And it's not just a meeting technology. Yeah, it allows people to meet and interact via camera, but it's also a phone, soft phone capability, it's chat, it's collaboration on content for across the Microsoft Office stack, and it's a replacement of what we used to call SharePoint. SharePoint's still around, but not in the same context as we use it, right? So one of the nice things about Teams, if you're not already using it in your organization, is it allows you to organize things with activity, chat, Teams, calendar, calls, and the files you work in. So it is a complete collaboration suite that allows you to stay in continuous operations despite wherever your staff is, whether they're traveling, whether they're working from home, or both. We will travel again, I expect. It doesn't matter where they are, whether they're on a mobile device, sitting in their car, attending a meeting, like they're right there in the office with you. it enables a completely different level of engagement and collaboration, not just with the meeting capability like you see we're doing today inside the GoToWebinar, but it also does 20 other things that you can't do with a traditional meeting technology. Virtual meetings, desktop screen sharing, that kind of stuff, chat function, remote file access, and Outlook calendar integration so that you're able to constantly engage with the folks that you need to work with and check their availability, okay? And one of the most important things that overarches all business continuity and the cloud migration, any use of this stuff, is going to be the security. And with that, I'm going to introduce Phil Jackson, our CIO at Arctic IT. Take it away, Phil.
Thanks, Dave. As you said, security plays a big role in this continuity discussion. If you don't have security, you don't have governance and compliance, that's going to really affect your continuity. And so really these are the things I think about as I run our internal IT is these security, compliance, integration. They're all so important. And like you said, the Microsoft cloud is really where it's at. There's no other cloud provider that provides the level of depth and breadth that they do. There's lots of cloud providers out there, and they all may do one thing, but only kind of Microsoft does it across every layer that you need it. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Microsoft 365 today, and what it brings to the table as it relates to kind of cloud-based secure environment to enable continuity for your business. So the first thing is Microsoft 365 apps for business. You may have formerly heard this called Office 365. We say the artist formerly known as Office 365. That's just changed in the last couple of weeks. So what we still slip up and call it Office 365 some because we've only had a couple of weeks, but it is now called Microsoft 365 apps for business. And those are the things that have been around for years, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, but way more than that when you talk about the Microsoft cloud. We start talking about Teams and OneDrive and SharePoint, and all of those things are built in that Office 365. But while we're talking about security, if you look at the bottom of that, always on the latest version with automatic updates. One of the most important things you can do as an organization for your security is make sure things are patched. Most of breaches happen either because of social engineering, something like that, phishing, which can be prevented with multi-factor authentication that's available, or that things haven't been patched. If you do those two things and you do them well, you can rest assured you're probably pretty secure. So Microsoft 365 gives you that always on. And then there's Windows 10, certainly the most secure operating system Microsoft has ever developed. They put a lot of effort into security around that. And also it is, notice they're always on the latest version. Again, keeping those workstations patched and up to date because that security landscape is ever changing. It's a cat and mouse game all of the time. And then finally, mobility and security. We talked a lot about being able to work from anywhere, anytime, all of that, but that brings a whole new level of security that you need to think about in the zero trust environment. And so Microsoft has so many tools to help you with the security and give you lots of telemetry around what your people are doing, where they're doing it from, and secure your organization. So let's talk about some of that layered security. You know, there's not just, you can't just, like in the old days of castles, put up a moat and a big wall and call it good. There's layers of security that have to happen here. So we're going to start with the Microsoft Defender Advanced Threat Protection. That's what goes on your desktop. That's what goes on your workstations. That's that endpoint security. And it's really more, you know, in the old days, it was just antivirus. This advanced threat protection is very advanced. It's looking all the time at what's going on, what connections are being made from your machine. If it thinks that something shouldn't be connecting to your machine, it'll just shut that down. Or something tries to encrypt something, it's like, oh, that's not good, and it'll shut that process off. So that's kind of your endpoint. Then we know that a lot of threats come through Exchange in your email program. So you get this Exchange Online Advanced Threat Protection. And that's more than just kind of anti-spam. It's anti-malware. You know, if there's Microsoft has so much data on what's coming in. So if a threat comes in and it got delivered to your inbox, and then as Microsoft examines all of that and sees, oh, that was a threat, it will actually pull it out of your inbox or rewrite the URL or that kind of stuff. So it's way more advanced than just the old anti-spam stuff we used to have. And then cloud app security, again, you can see, you can limit what countries people log into from, you can see what they're doing, what kind of connections are being made, what data is being shared, all of that, and kind of get a grip on if you've got any shadow IT going on. And then finally, there's Azure Advanced Threat Protection. So Dave talked a little bit about that PAS and IaaS. And so if you have that, those kinds of services, then you have that Azure Advanced Threat Protection, which has AI built in and kind of protects your servers and your high value assets and your identity. So let's talk about the modern workplace delivered. And so again, this working remotely situation has brought new challenges, but also new opportunities. And so we talk about collaborating on documents simultaneously with the Microsoft services. You know, Dave and I collaborated on this presentation in real time together. Only you can do that on the cloud. So you can't do that if you just have an old file server on premise. You know, it tells you the document's locked, that kind of thing. You get to be able to collaborate together because of that. And then in this environment, who could live without shared calendars, so that you can see who's busy and kind of schedule meetings and appointments and that kind of stuff. We use a lot of Microsoft Teams in our environment. It really allows us to be agile and work fast, more than just email. It's a lot faster to get a resolution over Teams than it is over email. Dave talked about Power BI and some of the real-time analytics you can get. So you have that, and all of this is integrated together. We have a Power App, some Power Apps in our organization. You can build those right on the Microsoft 365. They're integrated with email, they're integrated with Teams, they're integrated in every part of the stack. And then finally, business continuity. So just about the things we were talking about today, I could pick up my mobile phone. I could do everything that I could do at my desktop on my phone if I was somewhere else, or at my home, wherever, laptops, desktops, mobile devices, tablets. You get all of that, some really great apps. So ultimately, when you put all of this together, you can save time, money, and resources with cloud technology and security at scale. Microsoft spends more on security than they ever have. They have thousands of people dedicated, and it's quite the operation. They have resources that the normal business can't even think about having. And that's why it's important and why it matters to have your stuff up in the cloud, because it gives you scalability and security.
All right, well, thank you, Phil. All right, so as we review some of the things we talked about and how we're going to potentially migrate some of these workloads to the cloud so that we enable business continuity in that modern workplace, again, it's a phased approach, and different size organizations are going to do this at a different speed. Ideally, most of you that are in attendance today do have some type of investment in the cloud, even if you don't know about it. But governing that investment and making sure that it's secure and sets you up for continuity going forward in the grand scheme of context that we're all under today, situationally with COVID-19, it's important to understand there's a pathway to get there. It is not as daunting as you might assume. It's not scary. It's not as challenging as maybe you think it used to be. There's a methodology to get there. This is what we consider our 9 steps as we go through a project plan. If you look up cloud migration, you'll find 100 other recipes that are all very similar to those 9 steps. We just like the Rube Goldberg approach because it makes sense. If you don't know who Rube Goldberg is, look it up. It's some funny stuff. So one of the things about working with tribal organizations, we've been doing it for quite a long time. We've worked all over the United States. We are based, our headquarters is in Anchorage, Alaska. I'm talking to you from about 40 minutes out in New York City today. That's where I'm based in New York. Bill's talking to you from Texas, right? So we have folks all over the place. Drew's talking to you from Minnesota. It's a matter of understanding the space that we're in. Tribal enterprise, tribal governments are one of what we consider our big investments over the years. Understanding what the constraints are and the concerns that those organizations have, both operationally, governmentally, and compliance-wise, that's our expertise. We do all of that through a Microsoft lens. That is really the focus of our technology in depth. We work with quite a few partners that are out there as well. For example, we talked about that Microsoft Cloud Stack. We talked a little bit about AWS. Depending on the size of your enterprise, your IT and your executive team will be aware of the differences in those infrastructures. Some of those decisions are made for cost, compatibility, geolocation. And as I said to you earlier, it is not a bad strategy to not maybe have all of your eggs in one basket, depending on the size of your enterprise. Then there's also a whole suite of tools out there to look at both of those cloud environments. I might have some private cloud, I might have some AWS, and I might have some Microsoft Azure infrastructure. And I want a tool that's going to allow me to look at all of that cloud infrastructure and what we call network topology, the security, how I'm managing it. More importantly, where am I saving money? Where am I spending too much on my utilization of those cloud assets so I can manage that well? I know that we have a guest that's with us today in attendance from Nutanix. That's a solution that we find once in a while. Some of our larger properties, we work with them in some of our state and local and federal opportunities as well. So it's interesting to know that the tools that you look from the outside into these cloud environments are also just as important as the assets you place in them. So please know that that's the expertise at your IT department. If they haven't made those investments, they'll need to get that education and they'll need someone to help them get that done. And that's where we come in. All right, so one of the cool things that's out there right now for us, we're doing a complimentary evaluation of the different assets that you might have. It's a 2-hour remote meeting. In the event that we're able to come on site in the future, we'd still do that with you. But figuring out what opportunity you have to move something to the cloud just to be more effective and help you get that done. It's a free consultation. We can help your IT department figure out what they might be able to move in a short period of time. Probably already leverage some of the investments you have that you just haven't taken to full value quite yet. Let us know if you're interested and reach out to us at connect@arcticit.com and we'll get that scheduled for you. Microsoft has also put some skin in the game to help businesses communicate and collaborate. You'll see out there that you can get Teams for free for 6 months. It's the standard version of Teams, but it at least helps you meet and collaborate and maybe get a better investment of your time working with your different organization members that are working from home than you are. If you're interested in how to figure out how to take advantage of that, we will help you deploy, get started, and give you free training on Teams to take advantage of it if you aren't already today. So that's a no-cost implementation of the standard version of Teams using that free offer from Microsoft. And we're doing that specifically for any of our existing and non-customers inside Indian country. So please reach out to us again at connect@arcticit.com. And with that, we'd like to open it up to some questions. So anybody have any questions?
Thanks, Dave. That was great. A couple of questions that came in. I think the first one you've heard before. I'm part of a tribe who doesn't want their information either off the reservation or in the cloud. Are you seeing less of this in your travels?
Great question. You know, Chuck, you've been doing this longer than I have, right? So the cloud and the conversation has definitely evolved much more rapidly over the past few years. This situation accelerates that even more. It's about trust. It really is about trust. And when we're dealing with, you know, my parent organization has a council and a board that I report to, and even their evolution to trusting the cloud and understanding how the cloud is more secure. than having my resources on premise. One of the things that's driving that conversation, Chuck, is the amount of ransomware that tribes are finding themselves hit with throughout the country. And all of a sudden they're like, well, how was our, we had all of our data here and it was all locked up in our servers and we assumed security and boom, we're hit with ransomware. How can we protect ourselves from that? Well, one of the easiest ways to do that, and it's not that you can't protect yourself on premise, but one of the more cost-effective ways to do that is to have redundant cloud storage. Even if you want to keep your operational data on premise, backing it up to a cloud at a minimum versus just using it from there, and there's different reasons for that. Some of the tribes we work with don't have really good cloud connectivity. They don't have good bandwidth. And that's a challenge for a lot of those folks. But backing up your information to a cloud resource, one of the things that you can do now for virtually no money, and that's really a fact, it's not expensive, not like it used to be, is to encrypt your data in the cloud with your own encryption key. It's called bring your own key. And it's not just Microsoft that offers that, AWS can do that, anybody else can do that nowadays, where you're gonna take your data, you're going to encrypt it, and you're going to have your own key, and they're going to send you that key. This is one of my bring your own keys right here. I have a key. They're going to bring you that key, and you're going to have to store that. You don't want to lose that key, because if anybody subpoenas your data up there, or there's a breach up there, and they get to your data, it's encrypted. And the only way to look at that data is with the key that you hold. That's different than a few years back when tribes were like, I'm not putting my data up there. If it's subpoenaed or someone gets access to it from a competitive threat perspective, it puts us in a bad spot. And there's an element of trust that's not there. Well, you can trust when you put your data up there with your own key. That's one option. So the cloud, ultimately is more secure. And the question of sovereignty really is answered by saying, well, I'm going to bring my own key. And then it's more sovereign than it's ever been, actually.
That's a great point. Very good. Thank you, Dave. Another question, a question for Drew. How did you engage with the Gaming Commission to separate your management organization from your casino operation?
That's a great question, and it's something that I get asked often. Really, there's a few good points, and Dave already touched on one of them, which was to demystify the cloud. Right, cloud's a newer technology. People need to understand where that data really is and how it's protected physically, because physical protection is something that our regulatory agencies have cared about for a long time. Once you do that, you really need to lead the rest of the conversation with what you have in common, which is the protection of your systems and your data. In IT, you don't want your systems and your data compromised, and your regulatory people don't want your systems and your data compromised. The security profile looks different in the cloud than it does on premise, but it's not naturally less secure. There's just different types of security. And of course, layering security is always the way that it's worked, even back from the moat and castle days. That's why they had walls and a moat, right? Because you just need to wrap everything in security at the best that you can. How is it that if someone gets a hold of one of your laptops and you work in the cloud, that the data on that laptop is safe? How is it that if I'm deploying a new custom application in the cloud, that I'm keeping access to that application safe? They're new ways, but they're not inferior ways. So leading with that, what you have in common, the protection of your systems and your data, is an important way to get started building that relationship, that you're working together to make sure you're protecting what's important to your organization.
It's a conversation, as Drew points out. There's a little education that has to occur, and you can't just come in there and be like, we're moving to the cloud and create the argument. It's about that education, and Drew and his team did a really good job of getting that message to the people that needed to be involved in that conversation. One great analogy that we get a lot, Chuck, is, right now, if you had $10,000 in the bank, right, your checking account, good for you, that's great. If you went to the bank right now and said, yeah, I want my $10,000, would they just give you the $10,000? Would you have to fill out some paperwork? Do they have $10,000 in cash available, ready to hand you right there? Or is it just a number in a system that you trust is actually up there, right? So the challenge here is that the cloud is not much different than the banking, and people are afraid that they're going to lose the touch on the data and information that they protect because they're moving it somewhere else. Yet all of us put our money in the bank. The difference is that you'd have more challenge getting your money out of your bank than you would getting your data out of the cloud. Matter of fact, what some of the tribes that we work with have us do is they run their business applications up there in the cloud, and then they have a nightly backup that moves all of that data back into secure, encrypted on-premise storage from the cloud. So they run their operations out of the cloud and they back it up to their own facility. That way they still have that conscious knowledge of, hey, you know what? I still have all my data, and if I ever want it, I'm not held hostage like the bank would hold me hostage for my money. So it's even more contiguous than that. It's even more flexible than that for an analogy perspective.
Excellent. Well, thank you, guys. I want to say thanks, Dave, Phil, Drew. We appreciate your time and the presentation and all the information today. I think it was excellent for everybody. Is there anything else that you want to depart with everybody, Dave, before you?
No, I think we've said a mouthful. Thank you very much for all the attention and the time today. If there's anything we can do to help you out during this challenging time, we're all here as a community and a team willing to help. We've put some free community services out there to help keep you productive and stay connected to your organization. Please reach out if we can help in any way, and stay safe, stay healthy.
Thanks a lot, Dave. We appreciate it. And just a reminder to everybody, mark your calendar. We've got 3 webinars already scheduled, and actually quite a few more coming, May 12th, 21st, and 9th. And as you can see, our friends at Microsoft and Arctic will be back on the 12th. We've got Veeam and Varonis also scheduled with webinars. And also keep in mind, if you have any questions and needs around education, please contact us at TribalWise.com. We're more than happy to answer questions and give you an idea of what we have that can help you down the road. So again, it's Chuck Scharnagel with TribalWise. Just want to say thanks for coming out today. Stay safe, and we will see you on May 12th. Have a great day.